rationally thinking, you would say, well, if the answers aren't here in America and I can't find them here, then logically, if I go to Japan, I'll be able to get the real answers. Well, it's actually complete opposite. It
Really?
gets worse when you go to Japan.
Hey guys, in this video, it's the truth about ninjutsu. Are ninjas real? Did they even exist? Well, we're going to answer that question. My guest is Christopher Flynn, who I used to always see in the comments section talking about like ninja related things. And I always thought he was a troll, but then I found out more about him, found out his background, which he provided proof, extensive background in the martial arts, the military, special forces, etc., which we'll talk more about that whole thing in relation to Frank Dux in the second part of this interview. This part one, though, we're going to dig deep into the ninjas, ninjutsu, all that kind of stuff. Quite an interesting conversation. Anyway, if you like this kind of video, please help support the channel by hitting the like button, subscribing, sharing the video. Cool. Yeah, so extensive history in the military, special forces, law enforcement, all kinds of stuff, which is cool. Let me ask you this real quick,
Sure.
because this is really related to the channel. I know you said your dad kind of initially influenced you, with martial arts, obviously military type
Mhm.
things. What about the movies? How much of
Oh,
these
yeah.
movies
Oh,
influenced?
for sure. Bloodsport, absolutely. And this is the thing I find funny, because whether people want to admit it or not, because a lot of people talk a lot of mad crap about Bloodsport, Frank Dukes, da 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 da. But at the end of the day, that movie did influence an entire decade of people. I
That's
mean,
true.
absolutely, for sure. So because of that movie is actually how I got involved in, well, what the common folk would refer to as ninja or ninjutsu. So
Mhm.
that's where all that came into play, was because I watched that movie, and I thought at that time, not knowing any better, that ninjutsu was some kind of martial arts system. And there was something that was tangible that you could actually go and learn at a school. And at the time, they had what's called the Bujinkan, which is where Stephen Hayes and Dr. Matsami and all those other people come from. They run what's called the Bujinkan system or dojo, where they say they teach ninjutsu, which it isn't, but we'll get into that later.
Sure.
So I ended up going there, and I was like, I was there for like a year doing this whole Bujinkan thing, and I was just like, this is a joke. This is laughable. Like, all the people that are there, they're all fat, they're out of shape, they look like crap, and it was like a pay club. So you basically get your belt by paying money, and that's how it worked. So
They
there
they
was no,
did tests though, right? Because like obviously a lot of martial arts schools, you pay $20 or $40, at least that's what it was in the 90s, to belt test. And I know
yeah,
because it's a business, real quick, Chris. I know it because it's a business. I've seen green belts in Taekwondo pass by not even breaking the board, or they'll break it in like 10 tries, and you could tell the guy holding it's really trying to break it. It's like
yeah,
because they want to
yeah,
make sure the kid got his green belt and he's encouraged to keep going because it's a
yeah,
business. Like honestly, if there's a real school, it's like maybe let him try 2 kicks on it, and it's
right,
just like, dude,
yeah.
come on, man, you can't break this board. You're staying yellow green, you
Yeah,
know.
absolutely. And it's funny because, like you said, at the time, if we go back back in the day into the 80s and even early 90s, the martial arts was very rigid. So when you went to training, you sweated. You were in that studio putting in work, putting in time. So it wasn't just, here's your belt because you paid your money. That's
Mhm.
something that it eventually came, because when martial arts made the shift over into more of a business model than it was the actual art model, that's when you saw almost a shift in culture within the martial arts. So now you end up with all these new people with black belts coming out that are 300 pounds, can't do a side kick to save their life, but they're like, oh, I'm a fifth degree black belt, and they got stripes all over their uniforms. And it just look ridiculous, because you're just like, if you take that person and you compare it to somebody from our time,
Mhm.
it's night and day. It's not even close. Well, the Bujikon's no exception. No exception at all. It was all pay to win, and that's how it worked. So the more money you paid, the quicker you excelled up the ranks. The quicker you went up the ranks, the quicker you would be offered your own studio to go teach this garbage to another mass of people. So
Interesting.
luckily for me, because of my martial arts background and my experience with other martial artists, actual martial artists, it wasn't very hard for me to discern and like, okay, well, this is not real. This is nonsensical at best. So needless to say, I got out of it. And the gentleman that I was talking to you about, one of the historians, Antony Cummins, he actually went to the Bujinkan as well around the same time that I did.
Mhm.
And that's how I ended up starting to talk to him, because we both attended the Bujinkan and we realized that this is a joke, this is nonsense. So he went into his path of trying to unravel the real history behind ninjutsu, and I did the same. It wasn't until years and years later, after the military and after everything else, as a matter of fact, it was probably about 4 years ago, where we kind of reacquainted ourselves online.
Okay.
And I had seen that he had gotten so far within unraveling this mystery of the ninja and ninjutsu.
Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
And on the same token, I did what I could, because, as I said, I was in the military. I was very busy, so I wasn't able to get as far as he was. But I did uncover a boatload of information involving how the whole system works, where it came from, how it originally came about, where the sales part of it comes in, and what it is become today. So,
Real quick though, did you do most of your research online or through books, or didn't you go to Japan for a while? I
I
thought
did.
you
I
did. You
did.
actually went
Yeah.
to Japan for a while.
Yep. I went. Yeah, I went to Japan and Korea. Not Korea. I went to Japan and Thailand. I went into Seoul, Korea as well.
Okay.
No, I wasn't there long, because you fly out of Seoul and then you fly over to Thailand.
Mhm.
So yeah, but I was in Japan, and one of the things that me and Mr. Cummings had uncovered, which is interesting, because we both, like I said, we were separated for years where we didn't talk at all. Like, he had a channel, but it was very small. Nobody really watched any of his YouTube stuff, and was just starting to build. And it was coincidental that we both actually ended up virtually almost doing the same thing. So I ended up going to Japan to uncover like mysteries and find out what I could, as far as any information that I could possibly gather as far as the ninja goes, so that I can decompile this information and then put it together in a historical kind of context, so that we actually had facts rather than opinions and stories and fables and, all this mythology behind it. So my goal, along with his goal, was just to iron out what are the facts surrounding these people that existed in medieval Japan, if you will. So I went to the museum, which is not a museum. It's literally a gift shop. They call it a museum, but it's not. And anything you ask, like, part of the things that you realize when you go there is, if you're going there to try to get the answers, because in America, you got to remember, America's society as far as ninjas is so polluted. It is super murky. So rationally thinking, you would say, well, if the answers aren't here in America and I can't find them here, then logically, if I go to Japan, I'll be able to get the real answers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's actually complete opposite.
Really?
It gets worse when you go to Japan.
Why
1,000
do you
times worse.
think that is, though? Do you have a theory?
Well, it's beyond a theory at this point. But the Japanese government makes a substantial amount of money from Westerners coming to Japan to do that very thing, to uncover and figure out this whole mystery behind the ninja. So it's a huge market to pull in people, foreigners, into your country. So they kept it in place, no matter how silly it was. So all they did was they just kind of like built on top of these stories and this mythos in order to bring in attractions, to bring in people into the country, because that's how they make a lot of their money. So they're not going to cut their own hand off and be like, okay, well, all this is fake, this is false, this is not any of it works, because it's like shooting yourself in the foot. Why would you do that?
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
that makes sense. Now, did you ultimately want to write like a book, for example? Is that why you sought out to get all the real facts, or never
No,
wanted to write a book?
actually the complete opposite. Like, I had no interest in popularity or doing any of that stuff. For me, it was because I was a martial artist, and because of how deeply embedded into the whole ninja thing I was at one point in time.
Mhm.
I really wanted to learn, because I saw so many other people that were walking down this path, wasting so much of their time, spending hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of dollars into a system that is just a big fat scam. And I was like, well, people need to be aware. So somebody has to educate these people and tell them, hey, look, stop going into this, because this is not real. As much as fun as you might think it is, it's nowhere close to historically accurate. So stay away from these places. And a lot of the Buchcon people that used to actually go to Buchcon actually left because as more information came out and as the internet blew up, and now we have so much information that's getting traded back and forth, it's harder to hide things now because it's so easy to jump online and just record search anything. So a lot of these people that were able to get away with crazy ass stories are now being called to the carpet because the facts are out there and they're attainable at this point. Back in our day, if we want to get facts, we'd have to go to a library. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Black Belt Magazine or whatever, which ironically enough is the one that broke the whole Kumite story. Whether people believe it or not, it was like this was our reference to the martial arts world. Yeah, and we read about the Kumite, so we take it for what it is. Like, cool, it's real.
Which is interesting because the writer actually came out later and said, man, he wished he had never written anything. He wished he's never written any of that stuff in Black Belt Magazine because he took Frank at face value. And not only did he take Frank at face value, but a lot of the other editors and writers for Black Belt Magazine took a lot of things at face value without actually doing any due diligence and research. Like there was at no point in time did they dig into any of this stuff. They just took everything as it was. And I think the reason why is because at the time, trying to find documents or evidence or anything like that was almost impossible. Like I said, other than going to like a library where you could check the reference section, but how much are you going to find in the reference section on Shinobi? You know what I mean? So
yeah, and even what's written, how do we even know who that author referenced? Like when it really comes down to the truth, it's hard. And even if you research history, even if you break down the word history, it's his story. So it's somebody's version of in their story of what happened 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. You know, so it's like you almost have to question everything. And speaking of questioning everything, things need to neatly fit into like a short narrative, right? And the thing that always fascinated me the most are like museums where I heard they have like these secret rooms or these drawers where they'll put artifacts in that doesn't fit the narrative of the history that makes sense to them and that they're giving to us. It's like, well, if we look at this, nothing makes sense. So let's just kind of tuck it away and pretend it doesn't exist.
It's funny that you mention that because that's exactly what happened in Japan. They have the actual historical scrolls. They have many of them. Now, most of the scrolls that were dated back in a time during the Shinobi, I'm not calling them ninja. We're going to use the right name, the Shinobi no Mano. A lot of those ancient scrolls are still accessible in Japan, but they're locked away under key. So nobody has access to them. Nobody can look at them. Nobody can read them. Nobody can see them. And what's even more interesting is that most of the scrolls that are in existence right now are kept in private collections of citizens. And those things belong in a museum, but good luck getting access to somebody's private collections. You know what I mean? So just like you said, it doesn't fit the narrative to release these scrolls that are going to go against what they have built as far as their financial, money coming into the country through using, Shinobi or whatever. So it would be literally shooting themselves in the foot for them to expose the truth and say, hey, this is really what it was. But interestingly enough, there is some hope. In 2013, Japan actually launched their studies, an academic research team to go in and actually start diving more and more into the mystery and stories and historical artifacts and facts surrounding the Shinobi. And that happened in 2013. So that wasn't even that long ago.
Yeah, not really. Not really.
No.
In fact, I think, and I found this on Wikipedia, Me University founded the world's first research center devoted to the ninja in 2017. And they have like a master's course you could go through. I think they only like enroll 3 students a year or something. And the first dude that graduated was like, I think in 2020. So it's interesting to say that stuff, but basically like, what have you concluded overall with all your research and you going to Japan and trying to figure this thing out? Like ninjas, or I guess you call them shinobi, like they were real though.
Yes. Right? Well, not in the terms of ninja. Ninjas didn't come into existence until probably later on in the Meiji period, with 1600s up until even 1940s. That's when all this ninja stuff started popping up all over the place. Prior to that, it was known as Shinobi no Mano. That is the actual way you refer to these people of espionage or whatever.
Mhm.
So yes, shinobi did in fact exist. However, not as a martial art. It was okay. I gotta be careful how I word this because people are going to take it because technically military is a martial art. That's basically what martial art is, military art. So hand-to-hand combat fighting, that does not exist anywhere within shinobi. Not in any scroll, not in any book, nowhere does that exist. That is something
Now,
that go ahead.
real quick, Chris, though, so basically, it's a profession, right? Being a
Well,
ninja or a shinobi back in the day would be like a profession.
well, your first profession is as a samurai. That was your profession. Samurai and ninja are one and the same. A lot of people think there's this connection between samurai and ninja, and that's not the case. Samurai and shinobi are the same thing. You would have a samurai that would learn shinobi arts, and then you would hire that samurai to go and perform certain clandestine operations.
Okay.
Most of the time, 99.9% of the time, it's going to be him doing recon, gathering intel, gathering information to bring back to his daimyo or his clan leader and saying, hey, look, this is what I've uncovered through my investigations. And a lot of it is kind of like, even in today's modern military, when you look at the special operations, it's kind of the same as far as doing black operations and clandestine operations. However, there's this huge part of it that people like to fantasize about, and that's the assassination part of it.
Mhm.
And as far as all the records and all the historical documents, all the scrolls, there has not been not one documented incident of a shinobi conducting any kind of assassination of anything.
Interesting.
And that pulls a lot of that mystery out of the ninja now. And now you have to kind of look at it and say, well, is the ninja even interesting at that point then? Because if all they're doing is gathering intelligence, it doesn't sound very fun.
Not
So
necessarily, but as far as like the martial arts aspect, if you say they're kind of one and the same as samurai, right? But then they do other tasks that I guess are kind of frowned upon in a way. But here's the thing: wouldn't they understand like sword fighting like a samurai would? Wouldn't they understand Aikido, deflection when they lose their sword against an opponent
right,
with a sword?
okay.
So they
Well,
would know martial arts, right?
they would know martial arts, but not to what you're saying. Aikido didn't exist back then. Aikido was not around. You had a very basic form of Aiki Jiu-Jitsu at that time
Mhm.
that was used by samurais, and that came out in like the 1600s. Prior to that, there was no documents that were actually there's no evidence of jiu-jitsu in any of its forms existing prior to the 1600s, because that's when it was first documented.
Well, what about like, because I've also heard some of these guys would have a background in other martial arts, like karate, for example. So even if
Karate,
they're real
yeah,
quick,
again,
where I'm going with this, even if there isn't like a specific ninjutsu system that has this technique, this technique, this technique, you'd almost think it would be where it's individualized, where you got a guy who's got a background maybe in akujitsu or karate or like kendo or whatever, and they kind of like utilize some of those techniques. So for them, it's like ninjutsu in a way, right?
no, because again, you're taking most people, what they do is they look at it as it's all encompassing as one thing, and it's not. It's separate. They're two separate entire things here. One that involves infiltration, breaking into a palace, climbing a mountain,
Mhm.
writing out charts, documenting movements, troop movements, procedures, and protocols, infiltrating enemy camps to gather information or spread disinformation throughout the camps. That's what the shinobi did. The other part of it is along the lines of the samurai arts, and the samurai arts of it. Yes, you have the whole Bushido, using swords and stuff like that, and learning, how to use yari, like yari arms, spears. things like in those natures that were used by the samurai. So you did have those little art things that existed within the military itself, but it was not to a degree where it was a laid out fighting system of any sort. And I know a lot of people use the karate analogy, but the problem is that karate is not what even people think it is today back then. Like, for instance, I don't know if you know this or not, but the French actually are the ones who brought all these fancy kicks over into karate that most people like to see, all the flashy kicks.
Oh, you mean with their savate?
With the savate, that's right.
Mm.
Savate was actually during the 17th century, swords were outlawed in France. Nobody could carry around a sword anymore. So to replace the sword, they used their legs. So their legs became the new sword. And the whole point fighting aspect actually came from savate as well, because that's how they would score points. So you would just touch the opponent, and that's how you knew, oh, I stabbed him. So
so you mean when they were practicing, they developed the point fighting set? Yeah, because
right, and that's got introduced into the modern martial arts because that ended up in Okinawa, and then from Okinawa it went into mainland Japan, and then that's how the Japanese would do their tournaments, was through this point fighting metric thing. But the actual kicks itself, like all the kicks that everybody loves so much, jumping, spin, all that nonsense, that's all based in savate. It has nothing to do with karate. Karate didn't kick above the waist, and they only had like 2-3 kicks at most, which is a lot of people don't know that. So all those fancy kicks you like to see that are in Taekwondo, Hapkido, or any of the, those, they're all from savate.
But see, everything like evolves. So karate now obviously is a lot different than it was, right? Just like MMA is a lot different than it was 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. Like it just evolves. But well, let me ask you this: as far as like the Dux-Ryu Ninjutsu, now Frank Dux himself will say, I'm the first guy that said there is no ninjas. Nobody's a ninja, and it's just this profession. But as far as ninjutsu goes, he says it's really the principles. So, like with what he developed, does it make sense to you as far as like he would have students from like go out, like one guy would be like a Krav Maga master, another guy, like a professional boxer, and these are real people from his schools, by the way, like in other people going out and then bringing stuff back that he would implement. So if he's got certain principles, but he's taking techniques from all these systems and then creating the Dux-Ryu system and saying you're not a ninja because that's like a profession, like a secret agent, which we'll get into that because apparently he went that route as well. So if you think about it, he's like a real life ninja as far as like the secret agent, if you go by the secret man book. But what do you think about Dux-Ryu as far as, can you call it a system? Because he's just kind of almost like one of the first early mixed martial arts guys, if you think about it. And despite what you think about Senzo Tanaka, he did legitimately train with a guy named Jack Secchi. So he started off with jiu-jitsu, and then he just added all these things. And a lot of his students went out there in the field, so to speak, almost kind of like with what you and your buddies were doing, how you got exposed to all these other martial arts. And if you had technically a dojo called, Chris whatever dojo, it'd be really similar to Dux-Ryu. And in a lot of ways, I think you could agree that you guys, what you and your friends came up with together, could technically kind of be its own system.
Right. And that's kind of why I prefaced this conversation by using it as an example. And that was to kind of give some kind of a leeway to what Dux is doing. However, the problem with it is that they're disconnected. The hand-to-hand combat portion of fighting and martial arts is not a part of ninjutsu at all in any shape or form. It's disconnected. It has nothing to do with that. So Frank, what he did was he created a martial arts system. It is not ninjutsu. It's not even close to ninjutsu. It has nothing to do with ninjutsu. You might just call it any name, Frank Fu, or whatever name you decide to come up with, because it's so disconnected from what historically the shinobi did and was. And there's where the problem is. And so you can't interlace them together and say, okay, well, Frank went around and got all these different systems and all these different styles, started combining them together. Yeah, he made a great martial art then. That's what he created. Created a martial art in essence. But in no way, shape, or form is that connected or can be inserted into shinobi, because it's fundamentally polar opposites. And there's where the problem is.
The whole Dux-Ryu Ninjutsu, from a marketing standpoint in the 80s, because ninjas were so big, and big. People didn't know, what you ended up learning about the whole thing. But from a marketing perspective, like you have your karate classes, you have your judo classes, And then like even Sky Benson, who I interviewed on the channel, when he ran
Right.
across that in the valley, he's like, ooh, ninjutsu, like that. What is this? This is like the new thing, right? You know, so from a marketing perspective, I guess it made sense for Frank to want to go that route and just kind of because that was all over Black Belt magazine. Everybody talking about ninjas and all this
Yeah,
stuff.
definitely, for sure. I remember it. I lived through that era where it was literally plastered on the front of Kung Fu magazine, Black Belt magazine, and some other knockoff magazines around that time that weren't very, prominent, but Black Belt and Kung Fu magazines being the most. But then you had all these other crazy people that are popping up out of the woodworks, like Sheeta Kim, Stephen Hayes. Frank was one of the people that popped up too. So you had all these. Another guy named Don, I forget his last name, but he came out with his ninja version as well. But again, the problem is that none of these fighting systems are anywhere whatsoever connected to the shinobi at all. Like it's just fundamentally not even connected in any way, shape, or form. So what you have is a bunch of people that are making martial arts systems and claiming that it's ninjutsu, or trying to find some way to weave around and attach it to the word ninja in order to market it, like you just said, which is what they're doing, talking about business people. So they're trying to market it to the public through this ninja window. And that's basically all that's happening. The problem is that people aren't coming out and saying, hey, look, this isn't ninjutsu. This isn't ninja. This is a martial arts system that I've created on my own, and I'm introducing it under the umbrella of shinobi. Like that's not what
So
was
that's
happening.
your main issue. It's not well. I mean, I know you think very little of the Bujinkin, but basically your main issue is that you don't think these people, whether it's Frank Dukes or Stephen Hayes or Bujinkan, that they should tie it into a lineage that dates back, hundreds of years or 1,000 years, and claim it's based off of what these
Yeah,
guys were doing back in the day. That's your
yeah.
main issue.
That should be everybody's fundamental issue, because it's historically not correct. And there's what the problem is. My issue is historically. Is it historically accurate? Is there historical evidence? Is there historical facts or tangible things that we can find throughout history that we can say this is connected to this? And if that doesn't exist, then we have to just go ahead and at least postpone it until more information gets uncovered.
Well, let me ask you this, Chris, and I don't know if you've seen the recent video that I did talking to Adam
I watch all
McKinley.
your videos. Yeah,
Okay,
I've seen
cool.
it.
The one with Adam McKinley, Tanaka is real. He was a guy that lived in that area at the time, and his wife, Saya Tanaka, had
Right.
direct ties to like the samurai clan and lineage. So maybe Frank can tie himself
So
into that with Tanaka.
So they claim. The problem with that is the lineage that they're claiming goes back to the Edo period, and the Edo period was the era of peace within Japan at that time. So there was no warring going on. There was no clan rivalries. There was no assassinations taking places. People weren't getting heads chopped off. None of that stuff happened during the Edo period. The Edo period was like prominently a peaceful time. In fact, it was kind of like the time of merchants. So in Edo, Japan, what you had a lot of bathhouses that came popping up out of it, out of the woodworks, where people would start making money through using, let's just say, I don't know, I don't want YouTube to demonetize you with certain verbiage, but there's an industry that arose during that period, if you get my drift, with bathhouses and the geisha and da 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 da. So a lot of these people try to attach their lineage to the worst time possible in all of Japan's history, because nothing was happening during the Edo period.
But what do you think about, like, in times of peace? I mean, people are still training, even if there's not a war, because they would prepare themselves for a potential future war, right? Like, wouldn't you rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war type thing?
Right. Well, this is where the history is so needed to know about. And I don't want to go into a history lesson because that would be a long video. But just to give you an idea, okay, the way it worked was during that time, during the Edo period, you had tax collectors, okay, that would actually hire samurai to go and collect taxes from farmers who also hired samurai to protect them from the tax collectors.
Interesting.
So even outside of war, the samurai still had their function within the society. They still had their jobs to do. So it wasn't like they just posted up somewhere and opened up a school, a dojo, if you will, training the masses. That didn't happen until like the Meiji period, which is way, way later on. And that's when you get into all the schools and you start getting into kabuki theater. And that's kind of where the whole ninja thing comes from anyway, is the kabuki part. Do you know about that?
Well, I know that as far as like the iconic black garb they wear was
Exactly.
kind of like symbolic of what they would do in art or the shows to basically symbolize their invisibility. Not that they were actually wearing these black outfits, but to
Okay.
symbolize that they were like
Okay,
unseen,
so you have
right?
the general concept, right? So the way it worked is like this: you would have the stage actors who were on the set, and they would be doing their acting, and then on the backside of it, you would have what's called the stagehands, and those are the ones that would be dressed in all black. And then the reason why they were dressed in all black is so that the audience could distinguish between the actors who were actually supposed to be in this thing
Sure.
and the people that were just moving stuff around in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that whole black thing comes from, the whole black outfit.
Yeah,
So
sure.
it's just to be able to differentiate between the people that are acting and then the people that are actually in the background doing kind of like special effects, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
for that time. So it wasn't until later on where they started incorporating the people in the background in the black outfits into the actual plays itself. So it would be kind of like a mystery, like who killed Emperor whatever. And then you would try to figure out who did it, and it would end up being one of the stagehands who was an actor who was just pretending to be a stagehand that ended up assassinating that person.
Oh,
And that's where that whole mythos of the man in black, hidden shinobi doing his stealth killing crap. It was all theater. It's all it was. It was just theater.
yeah, that's interesting. It's funny what you talked about that whole period as far as like the samurais being tax collectors, because it's almost like, so can you consider the IRS modern day samurai?
Yeah,
In a
with
way,
a
right?
pen, right?
That's
And
funny.
it's interesting because there's so much history out there, and I wish people would take the time out to actually go and research this stuff on their own rather than just taking people's words for things. Because we're at a time now where information is so abundant and it's so easy to come across information if you choose to actually dig for that
Well,
information.
here's the problem these days, Chris, because it's so abundant and there's so much out. Now the problem that we have is trying to filter it correctly.
Right. You have to
And
do your
that's hard. That's
it is.
hard.
It is. If you're jumping to Wikipedias and stuff like that to get your information, your bulk of information, there's a reason why colleges don't allow that, and it's because it's not academically sound, and anybody can throw up a wiki page.
Sure.
So you have to do your due diligence, and you have to actually really research into what you're doing, and you also have to get counter perspectives to the things that you do uncover, because you can't just take what you uncover as law. Like I can go online and read something right now and say, well, this website claimed that this is what it is, so this has got to be the way it is. But if I don't bounce that off of anything else to challenge that, then I'm just running away with false notions. You know what I'm saying? And
The
then
problem is, though, that, and this is just a problem people have in general, some more so than others, is confirmation bias. So certain things you already get, a lot of people already have a bias going into doing the research,
right,
and they will try to confirm their bias by finding
they
different
will.
articles that
Yes, for sure. And here's the thing that you use. Okay, there, like I said, there are historical records, actual factual, tangible historical records, scrolls, if you will, that were created by the shinobi during the time of the shinobi that you can always bounce everything back off of in order to kind of ground yourself. One of the main books that is used by the shinobi is the Benson Sukai, if I'm pronouncing that right. Benson Sukai. In fact, I have a copy of it here in case my pronunciation is off. But this right here, I don't know if you can see that.
Book of Ninja. Oh yeah, okay, cool. Japan's premier ninja manual.
And this is right here.
Oh, Anthony Cummins, the dude that you mentioned, wrote that.
Yeah,
With
so
another
he's
guy.
he's a historical researcher and
Yeah.
author, and he writes a plethora of information that anybody can get on their own if they simply research the right topics. So the Benson Sukai is actually what consists of, I think, like it's either 7 or 12 ninja scrolls that are not ninja scrolls, shinobi scrolls that were translated into English that you can actually pick up and read, and you can actually get an insight to what the shinobi actually was and what they did. And it's all outlined within the scrolls. And these
Yeah, that's
scrolls
interesting.
date all the way back to when the shinobi were running around. So that's why I'm saying there is information out there, tangible information that you can gather and get in order to kind of shed some light on this whole ninja nonsense that's going on. And every time I watch one of your videos, I always see somebody posting something about ninjas and ninjutsu and da 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 da. You see my comments, I'm like, oh my god, are you serious again?
Well,
We're back into this.
real quick, Chris. Yeah, like I used to see your comments for such a long time, and I always thought you were just some troll.
No, man,
Before
I
I
get
found
mad.
out about like your background, right? Because I didn't know who this guy was. I'm like, dude, this guy's just hating on ninjas and anybody talking about
No,
ninja stuff. I didn't know anything about your military background, your martial arts history, you going to Japan studying all this. I just thought, oh, this is some random internet guy who's hating on ninjas.
no. It's absolutely not hitting on ninjas. In fact, I'm actually infatuated with the whole thing of ninjas, and that's how I got started into all this stuff to begin with. So this is it's the ground formation of what led me onto the path that I led to uncover all this information that I've actually gone into. And then a lot of people don't know this part of it, but the art of war. Are you familiar with that?
Sun Tzu, right?
That's right. Well, the 13th chapter is one of the main chapters in the Book of War that a lot of people point to as far as the shinobi goes, because back in the day, I want to say it was 951 AD, around that time, Japan actually had convoys that were going in and out of China, and most of Japan's culture was actually lifted and picked up from Chinese culture, from religion to military tactics to even writing. The actual the kanji that's used by the Japanese today actually got its roots in China. So the art of war is one of those things that was picked up along the way. And the 13th chapter, Sun Tzu talks about using spies and how important they are within the scope of a battlefield or on a battlefield, how to use them, when not to use them, da 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 da. So if anybody's really interested in learning about shinobi, start with the 13th chapter of Sun Tzu's book. And within that chapter, it's going to give you basically the outline of how a shinobi and their functions, and as far as operating on the battlefield, would essentially work and look like. And then from there, you get into, like I said, the Benson Sukai, and then there's a bunch of other books that you can also get as well. I don't want to plug all of his books, but there's a lot of them. But if you're actually interested in learning this stuff and uncovering the mystery, so you can kind of go out there and start spreading the right information rather than all this disinformation. So at some point in time, this whole house of cards has to come tumbling down, because historically you have people out there that are really truly interested in what shinobi really consisted of and what they were like, and we're trying to rebuild and reestablish this history the correct way. Problem is you still have all these holdouts that are so stuck in what they think or what they believed or what they were told ninja was. And I think that might be the case with a lot of these people. So for Stephen Hayes, for instance, he's a prime example. Stephen Hayes actually went and learned under Dr. Matsami or Hatsame, I forget his name, but he went and learned under him in Japan. And it's not Stephen Hayes who was the one that was messed up. It's the one who told him that he had learned ninjutsu, and he is teaching Stephen Hayes ninjutsu. So Stephen Hayes left there thinking he actually learned ninjutsu. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, he's not trying to deceive anybody.
No,
He's
Stephen
literally...
Hayes wasn't. Stephen Hayes wasn't. He believed what he was told, and then he went out and then pushed this as this is ninja, this is ninjutsu, not knowing that historically it was completely inaccurate and it wasn't even close to what ninjutsu and shinobi actually was back in the day. And it might have even been the case with even his instructor, because again, during the Edo period, there was a lot of stuff being sold and merchandised, because you had a lot of people out of work. You had armies, literally armies of people that were out of work, and they had to figure out a way to make a living. So you had all this stuff being just created out of thin air that people were just making up and were spreading it as truth. And then throughout time, that kind of just became the norm, that this is what this was, and this is true, and this is true, and blah, 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 when none of it is actually true. It was all fake. It was just made up by somebody who was trying to make a dime. And then that gets handed down.
Funny enough, like, being a ninja is always kind of associated with like superhuman abilities. And now where it's gone is that one of the most popular shows is what, American Ninja Warrior?
American Ninja
Or
Warrior,
you just
right?
associate like the ninja with oh, you're really good on monkey bars and
Right,
jumping on things in water
right.
and stuff like
Which is
that.
funny because that's actually more historically accurate than all these other schools are.
Oh, okay. So you go through the
So
American Ninja Warrior training to be more of a real
it's
ninja then,
more,
right?
that would be more accurate than any of this other stuff that's out there that you're seeing as far as ninja training, where people are literally throwing punches and kicks and chopping and breaking stuff and sparring and doing joint locks and pressure points and takedown. None of that is shinobi no mano. None of that is shinobi. None of that is ninja. That's all martial arts stuff that
Mhm.
was created like during the 1940s all the way up into, you know, today is when a lot of these martial arts start popping up all over the place. So you're essentially learning a mixed martial art that somebody took, like you said earlier, took a bunch of stuff, put it
Yeah.
together, and now they're just reintroducing it and trying to sell it using the word ninja attached to it, because at
It's
that
great
time
marketing.
it was great marketing, huge pitch. So
Mhm.
if you want to get the masses in, that's how you sell it. Put the word ninja on it, and you're going to make some kind of money.